There was once a great and noble king whose land was terrorized by a crafty dragon. The scaly beast delighted in ravaging villages with his fiery breath. Helpless victims ran from their burning homes only to be snatched into the dragon's jaws or talons. Those devoured instantly were considered more fortunate than those carried back to the dragon's lair to be devoured at his leisure. The king led his sons and knights in many valiant battles against the dragon, but one day, riding alone in the forest, one of the king's sons heard his name purred low and soft. In the shadows of the trees lay the dragon. The creature's heavy-lidded eyes focused on the prince, and the reptilian mouth stretched into a friendly smile. "Don't be alarmed," said the dragon, as gray wisps of smoke rose from his nostrils. "I am not what your father thinks." "What are you, then?" asked the prince, slowly drawing his sword as he pulled in the reins to keep his fearful horse from bolting. "I am pleasure," said the dragon. "Ride my back, and you will experience more than you ever imagined. Come now, I have no harmful intentions. I seek a friend, someone to share flights with. Have you ever dreamed of flying, ever longed to soar in the clouds?" Visions of soaring high above the hills drew the prince hesitantly from his horse. The dragon laid out a great wing to serve as a ramp to his rigid back. Between the spiny projections, the prince found a secure seat. Then the creature snapped his powerful wings twice and launched them into the sky. The prince's apprehension melted into awe and exhilaration. From then on, he met the dragon often, but secretly, for how could he tell his father, his brothers, or the knights that he had befriended the enemy? The prince felt separate from them all. Their concerns were no longer his concerns. Even when he wasn't with the dragon, he spent less time with those he loved and more time alone. Eventually, the skin on the prince's legs became calloused from gripping the rigid back on the dragon, and his hands grew rough and hardened. After many nights of riding, he discovered scales growing on the backs of his hands. With dread, he realized what would happen if he were to continue, so he resolved to never return to the dragon again. But after a few nights of resisting, he again sought out the dragon, having been tortured with desire. And so this transpired many times over, and no matter what his determination, the prince eventually found himself pulled back as if by the cords of an invisible web. Silently, patiently, the dragon always waited. One cold, moonless night, their excursion became a foray against a sleeping village. Torching the thatched roofs with fiery blasts from his nostrils, the dragon roared with delight when the terrified victims fled from their burning homes. Swooping in, the serpent belched again, and flames engulfed a cluster of screaming villagers. The prince closed his eyes tightly in an attempt to shut out the carnage. In the pre-dawn hours, when the prince crept back from his flights with the dragon, the road outside his father's castle usually remained empty. But not tonight. Terrified refugees streamed into the protective walls of the castle. The prince attempted to slip through the crowd to close himself in his chambers, but some of the survivors stared and pointed toward him. "He was there," one woman cried out. "I saw him on the back of the dragon." Others nodded their heads in angry agreement. Horrified, the prince saw that his father, the king, was in the courtyard holding a bleeding child in his arms. The king's face mirrored the agony of his people as his eyes found the prince's. The prince began to weep, broken-hearted, as he realized how much pain he had caused the father. He never wanted to see the dragon again. The palace guards apprehended him as if he were some common thief. They brought him to the great hall where his father sat solemnly on the throne. The people on every side cried out against the prince. "Banish him!" he heard one of his own brothers angrily cry out. "Burn him alive!" other voices shouted. As the king rose from his throne, the crowd fell silent in expectation that a sentence of death would surely be handed down. The prince, who could not bear to look his father in the eye, stared at the stones on the ground. "Take off your gloves and your tunic," the king commanded. The prince obeyed slowly, dreading that his guilt would be uncovered before the kingdom. He had hoped for a quick death without further humiliation. Sounds of revulsion rippled through the crowd at the sight of the prince's thick-scaled skin and the ridge growing along his spine. The king walked toward his son, and the prince steeled himself, fully expecting a backhanded blow, even though he had never been struck by his father before. Instead, his father embraced him and wept, and he held his son tightly. In shock and disbelief, the prince buried his face against his father's shoulder. "Do you wish to be free from the dragon, my son?" The prince answered in despair, "I wished it many times, but there is no hope for me." "Not alone," said the king. "You cannot win against the serpent alone." "Father, after what I've done, I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. I am half beast," sobbed the prince. But his father replied, "My blood runs in your veins. My nobility has always been stamped deep within your soul." With his face buried in his father's embrace, the prince heard the king instruct the crowd. "The dragon is crafty. Some fall victim to his wiles and some to his violence. There will be mercy this night for all who wish to be freed. Who else among you has ridden the dragon?" The prince lifted his head to see someone emerge from the crowd. To his amazement, he recognized an older brother, one who was known throughout the kingdom for his onslaughts against the dragon in battle and for his many good deeds. And many others came, some weeping, others hanging their head. But the king embraced them all.